So let's into the teaching moment, and we are going back to basics as you tell us the fundamentals of the pitching motion.
Yes. Well, the reason why I'm doing this is, first of all, this is the time of the year. So we're in October when we've got youth pitchers. A lot of them are still pitching right now. They're on travel teams or they're on their own special teams. And we have high school guys that are playing fall ball. Some of them are sitting it out. So this is an interesting time of the year. But when October hits, they start to ask questions. It's the time of the year I get more requests for video analysis for help because everyone's knowing if there's something going on right now, they've got to hurry up and get on top of it because spring is around the corner. And in baseball, seasons go by really fast. So I'm always getting questions, and people are always sending me video to see, can you help them? Do you think you can do something? And I noticed that there's of course a mystery around the pitching motion. And of course, the purpose of this podcast is to help teach about the pitching motion in a way that everybody can digest. But what's interesting to me is because the pitching motion looks like such a blur to most people, that's the first thing. And secondly, because these days, with everything being data driven in the major leagues, it's trickling down to the younger kids and into other, high school teams, et cetera, where people are losing sight of the fact that even though you go to a showcase and they're going to be measuring spin rate, and you go to a showcase and they want to know, what your launch angle is if you're hitting, and just everything is so, the things that they're talking about are so different that I think we lose sight as to what is actually happening and what needs to happen in the pitching motion, so that regardless of whether you have the magic answer to how you're going to increase your spin rate or how you're going to increase your velocity, that if you don't move with the intent of what is supposed to happen in the pitching motion, if you don't get your body in the right place at the right time, you are not going to be able to put the ball over the plate where you want to put it and at the speed with which you want to put it without letting the hitter know what's coming. So regardless of all these little things where we can lose and become distracted by, we need more spin rate, we need this, you have to always go back to basics, to looking at a pitcher to see if he's getting the skills done that happen within the pitching motion so that he can get his body in position to throw the ball the way he wants. So in pitching, we want the pitcher, to throw the ball over the plate exactly where he wants to put it with the velocity necessary for that kind of pitch. And we want to make sure he did that first and foremost with deception. So those are the things that have to happen for a pitcher to be able to get an out. Now, in terms of the pitching motion, there are 4 things that have to happen in the pitching motion. And while I don't want all of you to think I'm sending you home so that you can start to analyze all your son's pitching mechanics, I want you to start looking at the general guidelines. And if you start here, you'll be able to understand more about what's going on. And when fathers call me, everybody's taking video these days. And I have a problem with it only because if you're a parent taking video and something doesn't look right, your kid doesn't really want to hear what you think he's doing wrong unless you're coupling it with the solution. But, I can say this all day and all night, and it's going to happen in 5 minutes. Some father's going to be doing a video of his son and then be pointing something out. But the deal is, if you learn to start to look at the pitching motion in a more general way, you can actually start to see where there may be problems. And the most important thing, identify if your son actually needs to work with a professional to make a change. So what I want to do is I want to break this down into just 4 things that are the big general concepts on the pitching motion that have to occur. The first skill that a pitcher has to have, and I'm going to eliminate all the details. So this is the first general skill. And when you look at the motion, you want to look generally first. The first skill a pitcher has to have, he has to be able to get downhill. Now, that may sound like, oh, well, that's simple. It's not that easy. He has to be able to get downhill. The second thing he has to be able to do, because he's sideways when he gets downhill, he has to be able to turn his entire body and become fully square to his target. And when I say square, I mean you look at him and he looks like he's in the same position he'd be if he was walking towards you. Every part of his body is facing his target. The third thing he has to be able to do, he has to be able to accelerate the ball. So his shoulder and elbow and wrist have to do very specific things to accelerate the ball. And what you see frequently is pitchers who don't accelerate the ball. They push it or they deliver it in a weird way, but he has to be able to accelerate the ball. And the fourth thing that has to happen is upon ball release, which is the end of acceleration, he has to be able to slow down his body and decelerate his arm. And if he doesn't do that, then that means something went wrong prior to that. So these are four general things. So, Joe, as I'm saying that, can you picture downhill, turn, accelerate, which the end is releasing the ball, and then following through, decelerating? Does that make sense on that general level?
Yes, I can picture that in my head, definitely.
Okay. Now, the cool thing about this is here's when we look at the pitching motion. On any four of those things, if number 4 isn't right, then number 3 wasn't right. Because if number 3 was correct, if he accelerated correctly, he would not be able to not decelerate correctly. He would not be able to stop his arm. If number 3 is off, he can't accelerate the ball. Something strange about the acceleration. Then it's because he didn't turn his body fully to be behind the ball. Because if he turned it fully, he'd be behind the ball, so he'd be in position to accelerate. And if he doesn't turn correctly, it's probably because when he went downhill, he didn't do that correctly. So that is the way you want to simply start to look at the motion. And then what I want to do is I want to talk about these 4 things and some errors that you might see. But to this point, Joe, does that make sense?
Yes, I think that it sounds like you start from the beginning, but then you take a look at it from the end, going backward.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. Well, the real way to say that, let me say it a different way. When you see something that's wrong in one of these 4 positions, look to the position prior to the skill prior to it. Each one of these things, pitching motion is a bunch of skills that a pitcher has to have. And if the skill you're seeing is off, let's say you say he started to turn. Let's see, turning is how he gets square to the plate, but he's not facing the plate when he throws the ball. Okay, well, guess what? Yes, his turning is faulty, but you go to the movement that occurred prior to that. That's how a troubleshooter works. Because the thing you're seeing that's off is always the effect of some cause that was created prior to that movement. That's the deal with motion. Those of us who analyze motion qualitatively, we understand that. If his rotation is off, you can work with the rotation all day long, but it occurred before he started to rotate, and that's why he couldn't rotate. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yes, I'm actually picturing it the same way that coaches may look at evaluating a hitter going through his hitting mechanics. I mean, you've got the stance, the stride, and there's certain movements that the body needs to be in. And if you don't have the hands going to the ball properly, you look back to see where the hands started or where the stride started, or if the follow through doesn't look right, then you look back. Yeah, I definitely can relate to this. Yes.
Okay, so let me tie in each skill with some of the things that you'll see and how it affects the next skill, so I can elucidate with examples of how number 1 downhill will affect the turning, and the turning affects the acceleration, and the acceleration affects the deceleration, and how any error in one of those is usually the fault of the movement prior. So the skill of going downhill is the ability of the pitcher to move sideways with his center of mass and to place his foot into a great place where he can do what? The second movement, turn. If he places his foot in an incorrect position, if he does something strange with his back leg so that his front foot can't get, there may be many reasons, but let me just pick one thing to make it simple. If that pitcher does not have the skill of going downhill with one, the correct timing, two, the correct placement of his front foot, he will not be able to turn. And if he can't do two, he will be stuck on three, and four won't happen either. So that is the importance of each skill being present to keep the pitcher able to proceed through the motion efficiently. So going downhill is critical. Going too fast, he has to slam on the brakes in a way that jars the entire motion. If it's too long, he's going to sink down and he's not going to transfer energy. If his foot's in the wrong place, he's not going to be able to turn his hips. All of those errors, when he's either slamming on the brakes too quickly, sinking down too low in his front leg, putting his front foot in the wrong place. So for a righty, let me be right-handed here for a second. His left foot, his landing foot would be too far to his right. For a lefty, his right foot would be too far to his left, crossing over too much. So you guys call it throwing across the body. The foot has to be in a place where he can turn the hips correctly. Any of those errors I just said will cause a problem that is a lacking of the skill of moving downhill. That's why coaches work with your guys on how to move downhill. That's a specific skill. So moving downhill, any of those errors will cause problems for the second skill, which is rotating. And everyone has listened, you know that rotation occurs in three segments. The pelvis turns, then the lower trunk and the upper trunk, which delivers the arm. And you cannot turn your hips if your legs are all twisted up. So when you're standing behind the rubber, if the downhill skill was not efficient and the pitcher, he looks like he's on a tightrope, his front foot is directly in front of his back foot, then you know he's off balance. He cannot rotate correctly. And during rotation, he will start to produce angles during his rotation that are going to bring his arm not to the right place for acceleration. Now, when we talk about rotation, if you have, like if somebody's spinning a plate on their fingertip or a basketball, it's spinning in a circular, flat manner. It's just staying on a flat surface. If a pitcher's feet aren't correct, when he goes to rotate, he's going to have to angle his body, and then you're not going to have him come into the correct position to be able to do the third skill. So the skill of rotating correctly and rotating separately, each segment, is critical. But the most important thing is rotating on that level surface, which is the fastest way for him to rotate. And the rotation is where the velocity is being developed that can be passed onto the shoulder. So here we've got, he doesn't go downhill correctly because he doesn't have the skill. Therefore, he can't turn correctly because he didn't go downhill correctly. And now when he gets to acceleration, he's not going to be in the right position. So if his body's not there, the ball won't be where it needs to be. So that's the connection between downhill and turning in the rotation segment. Now the rotation is important because the last level of rotation is actually rotating the arm into the correct position. So the shoulder of the pitching arm is actually able to roll forward just like a car tire does. So on a righty, his right shoulder has to be able to rotate internally, and it's rotating just like the right tire on the front of your car is rotating, direct towards the plate. The elbow is extending the hand out. And that rotation, because it was so square, brought his arm right to that perfect place. And now the tire can just go forward and he's got great acceleration. If you don't rotate right, your arm won't be in the right place. If your arm's not in the right place, if that shoulder is facing a little bit off to the side, then the ball's not going to be where it needs to be, and he won't be able to throw it. And he has to create another movement through the shoulder to get the ball in place. What we're looking for is for the ball to be in the exact perfect place so he can accelerate it forward. If you don't rotate right, the ball will not be ready when the body is, and the body has to make one more move to get it into place. And there goes the acceleration part of the motion. So that's how the first skill relates to the second skill, which relates to the third skill. Now, one of the biggest problems in pitching that I see is pitchers not finishing their pitch, which is called the follow through phase. But it's really the deceleration phase where the arm is doing what it has to do to slow itself down. But what's really happening is the acceleration phase is actually defined as when the ball goes from the furthest away position to ball release. But if the pitcher doesn't understand that his hand continues on all the way through a follow through, a diagonal line from ball release around, wrapping around his trunk as if he's trying to touch the number on the back of his shirt, if he doesn't understand that that arm has to go all the way through that distance, he will not go through the ball and accelerate correctly because the arm will be being forced to stop sooner. So the amount of force that he has isn't as great as it could be. So when you teach a pitcher that the end of the motion is actually when his arm wraps all the way around his back, and then it's going to actually fall down naturally, those are utilizing all the forces in the arm that are natural. And the pitcher, with his brain working on tasks, if he sees the end of the motion as through the ball, diagonal down and wrapping around his trunk, that force is a completely different type of force. So not only do you get better acceleration, but of course you get the deceleration, which keeps the arm safe. So if you don't turn correctly, you can't get the ball in position correctly, which means you're not going to go through the ball correctly and at the right time. And it also means that you're going to be putting on the brakes probably through the use of your body as opposed to natural forces that are occurring in all the joints to slow down the arm. So you increase the amount of danger for injury. So once again, if you don't go downhill correctly, you can't rotate and turn correctly. Your ball won't be in the right place to accelerate correctly, and you won't be able to stop the arm correctly. And those are the four basic general categories of skills that coaches and fathers, when you're working with your kids on pitching, those have to be four very separate departments where they require skills to do them correctly. And without going into all that detail, which is way deep, it's why I have a business and why people analyze mechanics. But that's the general thing you want to start to look at and use your brains to figure out, to be able to see, is my son or is my pitcher actually doing all those four things? And when you're looking at a pitcher, you will be able to see all of that.
Wow. That's tremendous, Angel.
It's kind of an informal, general way to break down pitching into the biggest parts. There are a million parts to each one of those phases. That's why qualitative analysis is so cool, but it's not for people to do. But this is like if I were breaking the pitching motion down into the biggest chunks possible, this is it right here. The biggest chunks possible. And it's a great place for people to start that are coaches trying to work with mechanics, struggling to try to understand it. It's a great way to look at your pitcher.
I think you just gave a great primer for all coaches, and especially, like you said, some of the coaches who are just trying to understand pitching mechanics. Thank you. That's amazing. This episode is going to be like a reference.
Exactly.
Very nice. Very well done. Awesome.
Thank you.